acknowledgement. Thank you. We'll go to item 8 on the agenda, notices of motion pursuant to Standing Order 11. Set out at item 8 of the agenda are 4 notices of motion. In accordance with Council standing orders, I consider that the motions should be dealt with this evening. Councillor Slinger, will you please move the motion set out at item 8A of the agenda, notice of which has been given under Standing Order 11?
I will, Madam Mayor.
Who will second the motion?
I will, Madam Mayor.
I call on Councillor Slinger.
I can promise members opposite that I will speed up, rather like a fast forward. Oh, Councillor Parker, you're dissenting.
Be called to order, please. This is being recorded. Councillor Slinger, can you continue?
Councillor Parker was dissenting from a sedentary position quite vociferously, so it's my right
continue,
to
please,
to
Councillor Slinger.
So, because of some technical glitches that aren't in any way the fault of our officers, I'm going to reread my speech. I'm going to speed up in the interests of the sanity of all of us. The reality today is that far too many renters are living in damp, dangerous, cold homes, powerless to put things right, and with the threat of sudden eviction hanging over them. Not my words, but all those of the Shadow Secretary of State, Lisa Nandy, but those of Michael Gove, in the foreword to the private rented sector white paper. As we wait for legislation, I believe that we can do something locally to improve the regulation of this sector. So my notice of motion calls for the reinstatement of Rugby Borough Council's private sector landlords forum, together with the landlord accreditation scheme. Why? For 3 reasons. 1, there's a need for better quality housing and higher standards. 2, private sector landlords must be part of the solution. 3, the government says it will make significant changes to the sector, and we need to anticipate this. Starting with the first, the government's own research in their white paper suggests that only 30% of private sector landlords currently demonstrate good practice and compliance, and the rest is patchy or worse. We don't need to imagine what happens when landlords get it wrong or when regulation fails. Of course, we remember the tragedy of Grenfell, but more recently, the tragic case of Awab Ishaq, who died needlessly in Rochdale, should be in our minds. Admittedly, that was a borough-wide housing association and not a private sector landlord. It prompted Secretary of State for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, Michael Gove, to say in the House of Commons last week, "Let me be perfectly clear, since some landlords apparently still need to hear this from this House. Every single person in this country, irrespective of where they're from, what they do or how much they earn, deserve to live in a home that's decent, safe and secure." And it's the second time this evening that I find myself agreeing with the words of Michael Gove. And I'm sure we all do, because those are very important sentiments. Taking my second point, landlords must be part of the solution. They're a hugely important component of this country's and this borough's housing provision. The sector has doubled in recent years. In the UK, there are 2.3 million landlords, owning 4.4 million households, housing over 11 million people. Third, the government itself is committed to some impactful reforms of the private rented sector, with councils at the heart of this. The white paper even offers opportunities to become a pilot area, and I hope that the council will take this up and explore it. The white paper also states that local councils should have a strong and effective enforcement tools to crack down on poor practice, and that they intend to legislate for a, quote, new, stronger, legally binding, decent home standard in the private rented sector for the first time. So I won't go over the whole 12-point plan, but it does include introducing a single ombudsman for all private sector landlords that they must join, as well as a new property portal to make sure that tenants, landlords and local councils have the information they need to help with enforcement. And I quote, "Levelling up awareness of tenants and landlords' rights and responsibilities," because it's obviously a two-way street. It says that the government wishes to remove red tape on enforcement and will then expect local councils to prioritise private rental sector enforcement in the same way as they do public health. So this is more local government, not less. This is a bigger role for councils like ours, not a smaller one. The Minister couldn't say in the House last week when these reforms will come in, but in the meantime, I believe we can act now here in Rugby Borough. So we should reconvene the Private Sector Landlords Association, which used to sit and whose objectives were, in essence, to improve the relationship between the private sector landlords and the council, to provide training opportunities for landlords, to provide an arena in which landlords, agents and the council can share information and concerns, and to encourage networking amongst all relevant stakeholders. I'm very grateful to the Chief Officer for Regulation and Safety for briefing me about the operation of the forum in the past and setting out the nature of the council's engagement with the sector. I understand that the forum was operated by the National Landlords Association, with the council providing premises, etc. I'm told that the council works closely and effectively with the big landlords, those who have 5 or more properties, but by far the majority of properties are owned by smaller landlords, and it's very difficult to identify these despite the best efforts of officers. I understand that the previous iteration of the forum held interesting and informative sessions, but that there was low attendance, which is unfortunate. A reconstituted forum will make sure that as many landlords as possible can be made aware of the new legislative changes and even the white paper proposals to which I've referred. There's also other local information such that the forum could distribute to landlords, including compliance on energy efficiency. So I urge the council, notwithstanding the department's limited financial and personnel resources, to take every measure possible to identify the bulk of private sector landlords and to communicate to them about the new forum. Finally, my motion also calls for the council to develop and launch a free standalone landlord accreditation scheme whose objectives will be to improve the condition and management of the private rented sector in Rugby Borough. I understand that the previous forum had looked at this when national policy meant that it would be zero cost to the council. I'm aware that in the absence of a national scheme, such as the property portal or the ombudsman, it's very difficult to make accreditation schemes successful because the majority of landlords will opt, understandably, to exercise their right not to join and that they may be deterred by the cost. However, I understand that the council, I urge the council to look at this further and specifically to look at councils where such a compulsory scheme has been successfully implemented. So given the difficult economic situation that we face, it's possible, even likely, that there are going to be more mortgage defaults. There'll be councils will struggle to buy or build more housing, and even private sector landlords may sell their properties in larger numbers as they struggle with the cost of living. So we need more than ever for a more effective and dynamic regulation of this important sector and for the most constructive and open relationship with it. I just wanted to thank Councillor Poole for his supportive motion and friendly motion, and just to say that on this side we are going to support that motion. I appreciate that there's a disagreement on the accreditation scheme, but I hope we can work constructively to make sure that there's some licensing, more effective licensing of landlords. Thank you.
Councillor Poole, do you need to come? Okay. Councillor Roodhouse.
Did I get up too quickly?
No, you're doing fine.
Well, before you two decided to pull the plug on Rugby Borough Council, I was saying, I can't remember, but still. The quick point is this. It was about housing associations, actually, and I think the motion and the friendly amendment misses that particular point, because the point I was making previously was that, as we all know, housing associations that we have in our wards are not exactly the best landlords that we have. And therefore, I do think that actually the Borough Council is missing a trick. And the serious point was, which you picked up in your speech there, was actually the really sad case that happened was actually by a housing association and not by a private landlord. And the media actually have picked up on that element of it, which was that actually the private sector, you know, while it's not perfect, actually the housing association sector is not that good. And in fact, if you look at the performance figures, it's getting worse. We used to, I think I remember I said, we used to have them in every 12 months and we used to have a talk to them in a conversational style. And I think it'd be quite good to do that. I think I also said, because I don't write speeches, that there had assurances that this would be looked at and it would be picked up amongst this, because I think it should be, because I think all elected members, as we know, we have a duty to the health and well-being of our citizens. The really sad point, it was the fact that it always seems to take a tragic event to change a system. I remember saying that. And that is really the saddest part about this. Why is it? Yeah, why is that the case? I don't know. I was at a conference recently and we were talking about this on Monday in a particular session. And it seems to be, you know, whether it be mental health or social care or children, it seems to take either a tragic event or something to happen for the system and Secretaries of State or even local authorities to start changing. Yeah, that's not right. And I suppose if we go back to the beginning of the seminar from UHCW and the rest of it, where we talked about Rugby Place, and I asked a question about multidisciplinary teams and integrated care systems, you know, my hope, my real prayer is that actually we can deliver that in Rugby, because I think that will start to make a difference on the ground. But it's the housing associations. Of course, we're a landlord. We've got our own houses and the rest of it. But we're slightly better, I think, than most of the others out there. Slightly different to what I said before. But, you know, hey, there we go. But we will support it.
Thank you. Councillor, would you like to come back on anything? Councillor Moran.
Thank you. I'll be very brief. I thought Councillor Slinger's motion is an excellent one, second time as well as first time. The element that I wanted to emphasise for me personally, with first-hand experience, with such a scheme in Oxford, and Oxford is clearly a very, very different private rental market than Rugby. The scheme there is £400 or £480 to £400 for a 5-year licence. That's just one example of a compulsory scheme. It doesn't have to be anything like that, but the principle is there, because the thing that really gets me about this is the opportunity to enhance standards and to put in place effectively a code of conduct for landlords that we can all collectively work towards. So I agree with Councillor Slinger and welcome to the opportunity to work with the party opposite.
Councillor Poole.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Firstly, I'd like to thank Councillor Slinger for his speech and welcoming our notice of motion. Thank you. Sorry. And thank you for accepting our friendly amendment. I'm going to use the word senior because I hope it's not the wrong word, but there's 5 senior councillors present when we tried this scheme many years ago and it failed. However, times have changed and we have to accept times have changed, and I'm willing to work with you and the officers to try and get this sorted. Madam Mayor, we all agree that there's a need to explore private rented homes in our borough where necessary, and that is why our amendment proposes exploring introduction of a licensing scheme to all rented homes. Officers have been liaising with stakeholders, including local landlords and Warwickshire Fire and Rescue, with a view to identifying options to improve private sector housing conditions within this borough and to deliver the corporate strategy objectives, namely to make sure that our residents of Rugby have access to high quality, affordable and environmentally sustainable homes. That is why I've put this motion forward. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Robbins.
Yes, I'd like to second that, Madam Mayor. I actually agree with most of what's been said by Councillor Slinger, Councillor Roothouse and my good friend Councillor Poole. We all need good quality housing. It is the right of everybody to be able to live in a property which is free from damp and is suitable for children and adults alike. And I think that is what we are about, and always have been. As a former chairman of planning committee in the days when we had committees of that sort, my job was to make sure that the housing in Rugby was up to standard. We did work well in those days with the housing associations. I don't know what went wrong, but I think they moved away from us. And I think that was detrimental, I think, to the way that the housing in this town was looked after. And I do think that, as Councillor Roothouse said, that the private rented sector is fine in some respects, but not in others. We need to find where it's going wrong and we need to put it right. But we do need to work more closely with the housing associations and ensure that they are in line with everything that we as a Borough Council want. Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I second the motion, the amendment.
Councillor Robbins. Councillor Slinger, would you like to come back?
Only to say that I very much appreciate the comments of Councillor Robbins and Lowe and appreciate the spirit with which... sorry. I'm looking. It's been a long evening and I apologise. I apologise for making it longer. But I just want to thank Councillor Poole and Robbins for their comments and we'll be voting for the friendly amended motion.
Thank you, Councillor Slinger. I shall now put the motion to vote, subject to the amendments made thereon. Those in favour, please show. Those against, please show. The motion is carried. Councillor Moran, will you please move the motion set out at item 8B on the agenda, notice of which has been given under Standing Order 11?
I will.
Who will second the motion?
I will, Madam Mayor, and reserve the right to speak.
May I just ask you to consolidate this to a 5-minute, if you can, because we have a huge agenda to still get through. Is that possible?
Yes, of course, Madam Mayor. I'll be very, very brief.
Thank you, Councillor.
My motion really seeks to address the issue facing us all and has been the main focus and topic of conversation and politics over the last 6 or 8 weeks. To pick out some highlights, for everyone that's got a mortgage, there's a huge sense of trepidation as to the next bill coming forward. Our utility prices are going through the roof. It says here food and drink is going up 14.6%. In my personal experience, it's going up more. What I want to achieve with my motion is to ask the Borough Council to work with all partners to address the needs of its residents in formulating a plan for this level of crisis. I think within that, the couple of key points here to conduct an urgent reassessment of the Council's financial position with regards to the impact of this crisis on budget forecasts, to conduct a reassessment of the cost of addressing these needs of constituents. But perhaps the key point here, and it would be very welcome, I think, for the debate if we're able to get this fact. But I was reading the Conservative chair of the Local Government Association was at great pains to say that every council across the country is in a great state of challenge. And that, as has been mentioned a couple of times now, the wonderful Michael Gove advocating levelling up. Every council deserves its share, its help. But to understand what rugby needs going forward, it would help to understand what rugby has had thus far from this government since 2019 in terms of levelling up monies. Because then we can perhaps discuss and debate whether we've had a fair share here or whether we're entitled to a bit more. And as that purse is getting squeezed, then that will help the authenticity of our argument. So ultimately, the motion asks here, please, that we could put together effectively an emergency plan of action for the benefit of our residents and constituents. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Moran. You almost halved that 5-minute slot, so thank you for that. So may I call on... Oh, Councillor Woodhouse, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a couple of points, really. We won't be supporting the motion that's in front of us. And there's clearly a couple of reasons which sit behind that. Number one is the point in the cycle that the council is actually in at this point in time. We had the statement recently, not the fiscal, another one, anyhow, from the government, which has come out. That also indicated what local government would be getting along with other fundings. And the mechanisms for that, as our Chief Officer for Finance and Performance will know, sent out a note to us by email, and can I thank you and your team who were very quick at responding to that part of it, is that we won't get, as a council, we won't know, as a council, I think it's December the 21st, I'm not quite sure, knowing the government department, it will probably arrive on the 22nd or the 23rd, what our local government finance settlement is. So we won't know, as a local authority, what the spending, actual money we get given as a budget, as grant and the rest of it. Now, as you're probably aware, the medium-term financial plan and the documents which the Chief Officer is already producing and has been circulating, and I think there were some initial ones in the Cabinet papers which have been out already, and certainly he's presented to me some initial thoughts around that, actually do give a medium term. So that goes next 2-3 years down the track, and it takes on board particular points that you're making. The differences will then become, as you move into the budget process of setting the budget and the council tax, is your priorities as a Labour group are different to ours, are different to the Conservative group. That's where the difference is. So we have a budget debate and we have amendments and set the council tax, which is usually them because they've got more votes than us. So, you know, that's, I'm sorry to sound a bit processy, but that's it. You're making extremely valid points, and I think they're extremely good for that particular process, but it's difficult when actually this local authority doesn't actually know what its local government settlement will be this year. We're very unclear, and I blame the government all for this, but I would, wouldn't I? How many Prime Ministers is it now? How many Chancellors? So, anyway, but the point about it is that, you know, that money is coming down. So we're still uncertain about business rates. We don't know, really, exactly what that's going to be. On a housing revenue account, it's a 7% cap. I'm unclear exactly what is that 7% cap about. And I haven't come across many local authorities yet that know what that 7% cap will be around that. Yeah, and leading off that, we then got to take assumptions about inflation. I saw a presentation yesterday given by PricewaterhouseCoopers of what that could be, and the OBR and the rest of it. There was about 6, I think, on there, and everybody was different. And that was the point that the presenter was making. We don't know. So the medium-term financial plan that is then presented to us is something that we have to take into account. And it's really for those reasons of the cycle we're in, the point we're in, and I'm actually sitting down with the Chief Officer over the next couple of weeks or so, and I'm sitting down with all the Chief Officers over the next few weeks to talk about and find out about some of those issues, which will then build into, if you like, a Liberal Democrat view about this council. The Conservative group are doing the same, and I'm sure the Labour group will be doing the same as well. And then as we move towards February, could be here till midnight, but we have to set a budget, don't we? So we'll have to do it slightly before midnight, in that process. But you have to remember they have more votes than us. But I mean, in relation to this, I take the spirit of what's being presented, and I'll take it there, but it's where we are. It's not the time, really. It's, you know, of what it is, and therefore we won't be supporting it.
Councillor Robbins. Councillor O'Rourke.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Sorry, I thought I jumped up quite quick, but I suppose, you know, I know what you're saying, Councillor Roothouse, about the cycle. I fully understand the cycle that we work in. And it has been very challenging, as we know, Councillor Robbins, over the last few years, because who would want to be an accountant when you've got no long-term plan? Because accountants like to forecast and be able to sort of make sure they know what direction we're going in. But I think the point here is, when I say accept what you're saying, and we don't quite know what it is, we have got some ideas about what might be happening. We do know about some of the things that we're already facing in terms of the sort of pay rise and, you know, the sort of the HRA that you've spoken about. We do know a little bit, you know, and we also know, actually, and this is why we want to debate this tonight, that we're in unprecedented times. We are almost in a COVID situation again, almost like wartime. The crisis that so many people are facing now, the financial crisis, we need to be there and planning now. So whilst I fully accept that we haven't got all of the information, we have got a lot of the information, and what we do know is that people out there are already suffering. And I think it's really important now that we consider those big issues, and, you know, we do start planning. I know we're probably not going to get the support tonight, but, you know, I am hoping that, you know, as things start emerging, that there is a sort of like support to actually move forward with us and actually look at what we can do in terms of the financial challenges, because they're going to be big, they're going to be awful, and actually we all need to work together for the good of the people of Rugby. Thank you.
Councillor Robbins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And yes, we know the problems, Councillor O'Rourke. We've been discussing them with my Chief Financial Officer for the last 12 months, because it didn't just start now. This started at the end of last financial year, as it does every single year. Once we've got the budget out the way, we start on the next one. That's how it works. It's not something that we just suddenly pull together at the last minute. And as part of our usual medium-term financial planning process, it is common practice to ensure that the current economic landscape is reflected within the plans and future budgets as best as possible. We do not see the need for an additional reappraisal. This is business as usual. This is what we do. It's how we do it. It's how this council has always done it. And all other councils up and down the country. And this information will continue to be presented to members as part of the in-year budget monitoring reports and the future year's budget setting reports. That's, again, what we do. You know that, Councillor O'Rourke. Maybe your new members don't, but you do. The leadership of the council, along with officers, has been working in partnership with Warwickshire County Council and wider stakeholders to ensure a joined-up approach to the cost of living crisis and providing support to our residents and businesses. Officers and I myself will be attending the Cost of Living Crisis Summit on Friday, as indeed will you and Jerry and many other members of your group and Warwickshire County councillors. We are going, that's what it's for. We are already in contact with Warwickshire Council. We are already working with Warwickshire County Council. We don't need another notice of motion to tell us to do it, because we're already doing it. The report presented to scrutiny earlier this month sets out actions focused on our residents, businesses and our employees. This action plan will continue to evolve to reflect the issues and challenges as they come to light. Safeguarding the health and welfare of our residents is at the heart of this council's corporate strategy, and the Live Corporate Strategy Delivery Plan ensures the actions this council takes enables us to deliver on our objectives. And for all those reasons, I'm afraid, Madam Mayor, we will be voting against this notice of motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Moran, would you like to come back?
Yes, I'm getting a bit tired of this condescending attitude to new councillors. It's not acceptable. The words that you just said, Councillor Robbins, absolutely incredulous. You said the word business as usual from a budget set at the end of the last year. You may not have missed, but we've had chaos after chaos announced in Westminster because of crises that were inconceivable 12 months ago. My understanding as a councillor is our bottom line objective is to protect the welfare and health of constituents in Rugby. I believe, and I fully appreciate the political dynamics Councillor Roothouse has just explained to me, we of course have to defer to the majority party. It's for you to decide the policies and agendas and priorities completely. But every business in this country is re-evaluating where they sit in today's world, how they can face their challenges. Every single business. As a council, sometimes bureaucracy gets in the way of that. It's irrelevant what budget was set 12 months ago, because there's a new reality of new demands and new costs to execute those demands. So by all means discuss how great the budget was set 12 months ago. That doesn't help people who are going to starve, who are going to struggle with heating bills. It's just staggering that you think it is business as usual.
We shall now put the motion to the vote. Oh, Councillor Slinger. Summed up, there's no report. So, please show hands. For those in favour, please show. Those against, please show. The motion is carried.
Oh, defeated.
Defeated, sorry. The motion is defeated. Moving on to item 8C, Councillor Livesey, will you please move the motion set out at item 8C of the agenda, notice of which has been given under Standing Order 11.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Who will second the motion?
I will, Madam Mayor, and reserve my right to speak.
Councillor Livesey.
Every weekday morning and every weekday afternoon during term time, about 200 children walk past my house. Recent research by the National Education Union has found that 8 in 30 children in this country, in England, are living in poverty. So just think about that. That's 8 children in every class. Or, if you prefer, about 50 of the children that walk past my house twice a day. Some of those children might be going to school or starting their day with hungry tummies. Some of them might get free school meals, but many children do not go to school. They're too young, they're too ill, they're home educated, they can't get a school place, or they might be out of school for other reasons. And of course, no child goes to school 7 days a week. So free school meals are only ever part of the answer. And how many of those children that I see, and how many of those that don't, because they come to school through a different route, are in families struggling with a cost of living crisis? Well, some quick maths, it's about 324, and there's 2 schools that are near my house. The point is that we don't know really what the accurate number is, and that's really shameful. We do know we've got the 3rd highest number of children on free school meals in the county of Warwickshire, as 19%. And that number's going to grow. And of course, there's loads of children whose parents earn just over the threshold for free school meals, and therefore they don't qualify for them. How can we persuade the county council that it needs to act if we cannot define the problem? So that's why my motion is calling on Rugby Borough Council, yes, again, to work with Warwickshire County Council to persuade them to update the JSNA, which is now really out of date. We don't know as a borough how many children are living in precarious housing and are at risk of homelessness. We do know that rents are increasing and mortgages are increasing, and some landlords are struggling to pay their mortgages and will need to raise rents. And some of them are thinking of selling up altogether and moving out of town. It might be difficult to find that figure, but it's not impossible. What it will be impossible to do is plan for any local increase in homelessness without this kind of information. And it seems to me that the tactic in Rugby is to leave this sort of thing all to volunteers. But to apply for grant funding, for example, for a warm bank that will be open before the spring, the 3rd sector also needs to have access to data. And while many of these issues are the province of the county council, there are things Rugby Borough Council can do which are highlighted in the motion. These problems affect us all because they affect the people in our town and in the surrounding villages. Where central government fails to act, then local government must act. This is our community.
Thank you, Councillor Livesey. Councillor Crane.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We absolutely share the concerns of the Labour Group about children in poverty and hunger. I think it's something that all of us are very concerned about. We do recognise and agree with the intentions of this notice. However, we wish to recognise the ongoing work, both by officers and by the Scrutiny Committee, in respect of this matter. Again, you know, there is a lot of work going on this already, and there's work already underway in partnership with Warwickshire County Council and our benefits team to improve the uptake of free school meals amongst Rugby's residents. And so we are proposing an amendment, which I believe has been circulated to everybody. Also wanted to add that there is work underway to review the existing community association service level agreements to ensure that they're more impact driven and contribute towards this kind of help and better demonstrate the unique role that the community associations can play in delivering Rugby's levelling up agenda and improving residents' pride in place. And there will be a report to Council on that next month. So I move the amendment tonight. Thanks.
I'll second the motion, reserve my right to speak.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you. Councillor New.
Madam Mayor, whilst I support the motion, or the amended motion in principle, there are a few things I'd like to raise, and that is that a lot of this is coming back to schools as well, and schools are already doing an awful lot to support families through Pupil Premium Grant, offering breakfast clubs, after school clubs, and obviously support with the early help process, which is hoping to recognise vulnerable families and give them the support that is much needed. But a lot of the problem is that a lot of people do not want to admit that they are struggling. There's a stigma, they're worried sick if they admit that they're struggling or they're not able to cope, that social services will be on their door, and that is a massive barrier for anybody trying to work with families to make them realise that there's support out there and they're able and they're eligible to it. I totally agree with you about the free school meals eligibility criteria, that 16,190 is extremely low with the cost of living now. That needs to be raised in line with over-inflation, actually. But schools, again, are not, immune to the cost of living crisis. And at the moment, there are heads and business managers actually looking at how they can afford to maintain the level of costs and energy bills going up, looking at reducing staff numbers. So anything that schools are expected to do above and beyond what they're already doing would need to be resourced, because this is a crisis that schools are facing as well. I just want to ask a question about the 3,414 children. I'm assuming that is the children that have actually applied, families that have actually applied for free school meals, not those involved in the universal years reception to 2, because that was quite a low number if that was everybody. So, that's the issue that I think we're working with, is that actually getting families to apply for these benefits and to apply for help. And I totally agree, there needs to be an awareness campaign that reduces that stigma, because there's a lot out there that they can apply for, and they're just very, very reluctant to do so. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I recognise there is an awful lot of work happening already. The difficulty I have with that is that a lot of it is done without any kind of collaboration or consultation, and it's quite difficult to find out what progress has been made. We need to know more accurately what the levels of economic deprivation actually are in Rugby. Some of the metrics that we use are pre-pandemic, and people have mentioned it, this is a growing issue, spreading way beyond the traditional free school meals measure that we used to work with all the time as the benchmark. So we need an accessible, updated position statement as a base to work from. Now, you might tell me we've already got one. If we've got one, can we look at that together and collaborate on how we move that forward? Because it is unprecedented times. All of us feel the same about this. It needs to be something that is much more collaborative than I felt. I'm sorry that I have to say I'm not in favour of the amendment. However, that seems to push it away almost from collaboration into something that's restricted to scrutiny committees and work on things that other people, other parties, other people who are informed and in the community would like to be involved in. It has to be much more collaborative now. It's unclear to many of us how the work of Warwickshire Food Forum, for example, will help Rugby families, and I know that's County Council. It's how that reflects on what happens to us day by day. Our voluntary and community organisations need to know what they can expect. In support from this quarter, we hear about community-powered rugby. That's a phrase that we've heard in this chamber. But we need to know what that means in reality. So we need strategies to, as Warwickshire County Council say, harness the power of our communities to tackle inequalities and social exclusion. Sounds brilliant, doesn't it? But that can't just mean a transfer of the burden from public sector to voluntary and community organisations without a lot of groundwork. And we need together to bottom out what that means in very real terms. With this knowledge of context, we'll know more about where to help organisations in our wards to focus their energies on bid writing, fundraising and so on. We'll know more about what kinds of good practice we need to look for and share. And I really urge councillors to support this motion in the spirit of supporting our most vulnerable children and their families in really hard times, and we imagine they will only get worse. So thank you.
Councillor Roodhouse.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think we're all saying the same thing, really, but from different angles, which is quite normal. Because we all want the best for the children and families and the rest of it. And I think we are all saying that, that bit of it. And I'm looking at the amendment, which is a friendly amendment, and, you know, and it talks about scrutiny, and I totally take on Councillor Brown's point about scrutiny, that you refer it to scrutiny. Well, scrutiny committee is now a smaller body than it was, and it's not like, if you like, the oldish way of doing it, and it probably needs to be more about, fair enough, goes to scrutiny committee, but Councillor Exton sends it straight for a member conversation and creates a plan around it with the scrutiny committee. So it becomes a more open and transparent way within the work programme. So that's number one, and if he nods yes, that's great. Yeah, he nods yes. So I don't have a particular problem with that, because that's getting it into the work programme, we get it set round. As has already been highlighted, on Friday some of us are off to the University of Warwick. Not quite sure which offices are going. Hello. I'm told there's a sandwich and a cup of tea. So I don't know. I've got to find the car park first. So there's that is a whole afternoon, right through from lunch to the whole afternoon, about the cost of living summit, and there's some pretty high level speakers. It'll be at a very high level. But it's one of the first summits I've actually been to where I've been asked questions before I went to actually register to get onto it, asking you what your priorities were. So that is different. And I suppose we could do this, couldn't we, Chief Executive, is actually do a complete feedback to the council on what that cost of living summit said, or a member conversation or something of that, and that would feed into some of this work as well. As somebody sits on the Health and Wellbeing Board, I get quite frustrated with JSNAs. The one I'm sort of banging on a bit about at the moment is self-harm and suicide, actually, because the figures are out of kilter. Rugby's still not good on suicide for young people, and it's self-harm. We're still one of the outliers on that, and the figures haven't been updated for some time. But I do know the amount of work that is going in is absolutely tremendous by people around that particular subject. So it's a difficult one, because JSNAs take time, because it's a statutory duty to put on 3 to 4 years, and the self-harm one is in and around that time. And I suppose it would be worthwhile asking Duncan or somebody within public health when JSNA is going to be refreshed. We don't really see those set on a timescale, so I would agree with you, and it's certainly I will take back to the Health and Wellbeing Board and raise with them on that we need to probably see something. When is the refresh periods, or how are they refreshed, and if you've got localised ones, how do you feed that back in? So there is something. I suppose, I was saying it again, if we go right back to the beginning of tonight's meeting at the seminar bit, we talked about Rugby Place. This is exactly the conversation that is happening or should happen at Rugby Place, and it is, and about its priorities. The bit looking at the Chief Executive, because the leader's not here, Oh, sorry, Derek, the leader is here. So, according to so is actually, we need to find a mechanism, I think, on these subjects of how we feed this information back in. Because for UHCW and the others, unless we're very clear about what our priorities are, feeding back in, the money won't come back down the other way from the top when you bang the drum. It will just probably go off to South Warwickshire or the north, because, yeah, Nuneaton, Bedworth and the north, far more deprived than we are, so they hit all the scales, they tick all the boxes.
Sorry, can we sort of try and wrap it
but
up
what
now?
I'm saying is we need to find that mechanism of doing that. I mean, we're supporting what's here because it's going in the right direction.
Thank you very much. Councillor Timms, may I call on you? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I normally refrain from saying anything that isn't really as a Rugby Borough Councillor, as a Warwickshire County Councillor, but I want to remind the members of Warwickshire County Council on the opposite benches that you received a briefing note which completely outlined all of the information with regard to the 3.47 million housing support grant which came down from the government to Warwickshire, which is being allocated to the most vulnerable families throughout Warwickshire between October 2022 and March 2023. That includes all of those on school meals and their younger siblings who are not at school. So I just want to remind that that money is on its way to those families and is being put through the local welfare fund, which we have in Warwickshire always retained, which we didn't have to, and which always supports the most vulnerable who need help with their food, electricity, energy, water bills, all of those kinds of things, and is there for the most vulnerable. I'd also like to say that we have also approved a funding package to be given to the voluntary sector, to be working with them to provide warm hubs throughout the winter. That's in that briefing note. So please, could you read it and perhaps share it with your fellow councillors so that you do understand in advance of Friday's cost of living summit what is going on and what is the detail of what is happening. There is a microsite being formulated so that there is a signposting route so that all partners will take part in that site, so they will be able to deliver from there, wherever they are in Warwickshire, they'll be able to deliver. So that is already happening. It's there. I support the amendment. I support the motion. I don't have a problem with that. What I don't support is the fact that information about the funding that is already available should be going out to your residents, and you should be using it and helping them and signposting them. And I would urge all councillors to do that.
Councillor Slinger.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. You've heard my earlier speech twice, and for which I apologise. I'll keep this really brief. I urge, it's been a long year, and it's been a very long evening. I urge members to consider going along to watch the Christmas Carol at the Royal Shakespeare Company. And as I look through the programme, I read about hunger, poverty, and social injustice in the 19th century, and I contemplate what colleagues on this side and on your side have said about deprivation and poverty and suffering. But it is quite pertinent to read in this introduction. And I've quoted Michael Gove twice already. I'm going to carry on that tradition of quoting Tories. A hat-trick, exactly, Derek. Too many people in Britain, we argue, prefer a lion to hard work. Once they enter the workplace, the British are among the worst idlers in the world. That was former Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng, Priti Patel, current Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab, Chris Skidmore, former Prime Minister Liz Truss, writing in Britannia Unchanged. I look through the brochure and I find some other quotes. I find a quote here that says, quote, "It is very hard to believe that the right to paid holiday is an absolute moral right." Jacob Rees-Mogg. I'll just finish with...
Hold on, Councillor, we're deviating from the topic
Okay, well,
here.
let me just say,
Can we just
there's-
wrap it up? It is a long night. You've
there's-
said it's been a long year. Can I just stop you there? Because
Okay,
it's not...
okay, but the spirit of Scrooge we oppose on this side.
Councillor O'Rourke.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just to pick up on some of the points that Councillor Timms made, I think your tone was a little bit patronising, if you don't mind me saying. And I will draw you to the time that you didn't manage to get us the funding for the social supermarket in Rugby. Rugby and Nuneaton and Leamington were all in the plan. They were in the plan. What went wrong? Thank you.
Councillor Poole.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It has been a long night. Can I thank Councillor Livesley, Councillor Mrs Brown for their notice of motion, and I fully support our notice of amendment. I agree with some of the comments made tonight. We recognise and agree with the intentions of this notice. However, we wish to recognise the ongoing work by both officers and already alluded to the scrutiny committee by Councillor Roodhouse, and I take his comments on board. Their work is already underway in partnership with Warwickshire County Council and our benefits team to improve the uptake of free school meals amongst Rugby's schools and residents. Furthermore, there is work underway to review the existing Community Association Service Level Agreement, SLAs, to ensure they are more impact-driven and better demonstrate the unique role within that community associations can also play in delivering Rugby's levelling up agenda. Also improving residents' pride in place, and there'll be a report to Council next month. Madam Mayor, I move the amendment.
Councillor Livesey, would you like to come back on any part?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We don't accept the amendment. I'm really concerned about a proposal to send this to scrutiny when what the children and young people of our town need is action. We don't need more talking. We need someone to actually do something. And we've seen with the warm banks that scrutiny is the place where notices of motion go to die. I mean, it's just preposterous that we're not going to hear about warm banks in Rugby until the spring. It's absolutely preposterous, and you know, and I don't want that to happen to this motion.
Madam Mayor, point of order, please. I did say in my last comment there'll be a report next month, not next spring, Councillor Livesey. It'll be next month. There'll be an update. Thank you.
We are going to vote on the amendment first. I shall put that vote. Those in favour, please show. Those against, please show. The amendment is carried. Now we shall vote on the motion. Councillors, just bear with me. It's not always easy. Okay, thank you. We'll move to the next item. Councillor Sanderson, would you please move the motion set out at item 8D, notice of which has been given under Standing Order 11?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move the motion in my name.
Who will second the motion?
I will, Madam Mayor, and I don't reserve my right to speak.
Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think everyone really appreciates, especially following COVID, the value of our open spaces, the help that they enable people to do, a bit of fresh air and a space to go. And we spend quite a fortune in upgrading and improving our recreational areas so that they can be enjoyed by the public and their children and their grandchildren. and indeed I see one or two people here in Whitehall Rec quite frequently enjoying the facilities there. However, what really annoys me is when I see that good quality equipment smashed, vandalised, damaged, broken by those. What they get out of it, I do not know. But it happens so frequently, park after park, open space after open space. And I think it's the campaigns with the eyes and OEU, I think that's done its time. It's time to look at other ways of looking after our open spaces. And clearly some of the councils I've had a look at who run park watch schemes, and that shouldn't be confused with the government's park watch scheme, which is about watching cars in parks. Really confusing. But this is a local government initiative where they've set up viable park schemes, working with their local residents, working with their local communities, working with the fun runners and the bowlers and all the other groups that use our very significant open spaces. And by working together, I think we can actually reduce the amount. I don't say we'll stop it, but we should certainly be able to reduce the level of vandalism. And I think we can then target public space protection orders, as we used to do on an Environment and Growth Committee, before it became a delegated responsibility, to put our resources, our limited resources, where we need them most, where we're having the most amounts of problems. Again, it's about encouraging local residents to come forward as volunteers, and I have not excluded ward councillors, because I don't know if you're the same as me, you get lots and lots of phone calls about what's going on in your local park, around your area, but there's no emergency number that you can ring to let an officer know what's going on after hours. There's very little communication in terms of getting the environmental enforcement officers out to deal with it. So I think working together we can put forward a viable scheme that targets resources much more efficiently than they are at the moment. And I'm more than happy to work with the head of public realm and the community safety to see whether we can deliver a viable scheme in Rugby that will reduce the antisocial behaviour that we do see and hopefully allow people to enjoy our parks even more so. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Howard Roberts.
Yes, thank you for my friend and colleague for the statements he's made. Funnily enough, or not funnily in a funny way, but weird, when I took office as portfolio holder for leisure and well-being, I had a guided tour of all the installations that we've got, and one of the questions I brought up was, how do we protect them from some of the idiots that go around vandalising them? And the response was that they were looking at it, and they obviously are disturbed by it as much as we are. What I'm thinking we need closed-circuit television there. We need to be able to, like we do in the centre of Rugby, what's the difference? If we want people to be safe, we put closed-circuit television in the centre of Rugby, and we have a very successful use of that. So why not bring that out to the open spaces to make it more friendly for children, parents, elderly people, disabled people, whatever? Because you're right in the statement that if you fall off your electronic disabled sort of scooter thing, and we came across, my wife and I, the other night, when we were passing the entrance to Rugby School, there was a lady on a electric trike, a disabled lady, who flagged us down to say, can you put the traffic lights to green? I said, well, I'm not that authorised, but I can press the button. But she'd been there some time, and of course, if we had closed-circuit television working effectively, she would have been picked up as an emergency case potentially, and it would have all been sorted out very quickly. So I think your input is valuable on this, and we will take it further. And I'll be talking to head of service and so on, see what we can do. Thank you.
Councillor Poole.
Madam Mayor, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Sanderson, for that. Appreciate public open space, parks. It's a bit different in the rural areas because we've got closed circuit TV, especially in my village. But Councillor Roberts has just alluded to in public open spaces further afield in the town. I'm afraid it's the cost at the moment. You know as well as I do the cost of CCTV. It's going through. We're having talks at the moment about up by St Andrews. It's very expensive. However, I do agree with your notice of motion, and I will support it.
Any other speakers? Councillor Sanderson.
Can I thank the speakers for their comments on that? Yeah, I mean, when you've got 2.9 miles of the Great Central Walk, I think CCTV might be pushing it a bit. But I think we can. People have smartphones. People use Facebook. There are lots of ways in which we can get information of what's going on to officers. Let them know. You know, I was coming back from the hospital the other day through the walkway from St Cross to Whitehall Rec, and there were some young people happily setting fire to one of the trees at the side of the Haswell Close, just so they could get the thrill of watching the fire brigade turn up to tackle it. And that's the sort of thing we've got to tackle. We've got to show that doing that sort of thing isn't acceptable and that there are consequences for their actions.
I shall now put the motion to the vote. Those in favour, please show. Those against, please show. The motion is carried. Item 9, correspondence. Is there any correspondence, Chief Executive?
There is none, Madam Mayor.
Item 10, common seal. I move that the common seal be affixed to the various orders, deeds and documents referred to in the agenda. Who will second the motion? Deputy Mayor, will you second the motion, please?
Sorry, Madam Mayor. Yes, I do second it. Sorry about that.
Those in favour, please show. Those against, please show. The motion is carried. Item 11, motion to exclude the public under Section 100A(4) of the Local Government Act 1972. To consider passing the following resolution under Section 100A(4) of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the following items on the agenda on the grounds that they involve the likely disclosure of information defined in paragraphs 1, 2, 3 and Schedule 12A of the Act. I so move. And who will second the motion? Those in favour, please show. Those against, please show. The motion is carried, and that concludes the public part of this meeting.